And we're live. It is Monday, February 3rd, the year of some of our lords, and some of us have spent the weekend praying to that Lord. 2025, 8 o'clock a.m., and the sun is shining, and the birds are chirping, and it is going to be a great effing day because you are watching Dog Shirt TV. It is a revolution in morning television, Mr. Cactus. Whoops, it says you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a revolution in morning television. And let's just review some of the things that happened over the weekend. Donald Trump imposed tariffs on the vicious Canadians and Mexicans and the Chinese. By the way, higher tariffs on the Canadians and the Mexicans than on the Chinese.
Not got unnoticed.
Yeah. I mean, we know who the enemy is, and it is Ottawa. Words that have never been spoken before. Um, there was USAID has been shut down. Given we have a new slogan that is sweeping the United States. The slogan is "At least I don't work at USAID." Um,
It's just anyway. I've spent the weekend just having a panic, massive panic.
One of the goals of the day of the show this morning is to calm down Holly Berkeley Fletcher
You're
and
doing a bad job.
give her a big virtual hug. It is Ev Gaman has showed up. Look at this. All right. We got more to do. The FBI have circulated a questionnaire about all the January 6th cases that you've been involved in. FBI agents are expected to self-report on this by 3 o'clock today. And I want to give a shout out to the SACs all over the country. That's the special agents in charge of the field office who are refusing to cooperate with this. And the FBI, who would have thought that the Sagebrush Rebellion, the pushback was going to come from special agents in charge of bureau field offices? But the FBI Agents Association has given special guidance issued guidance to FBI agents all over the country about how to respond to this, which is to refuse to with particular model language. And so we're watching that situation. And then, of course, in the largest cybersecurity breach in the federal government's history, Elon Musk has broken into the payment system and of the Treasury Department with the blessing of the president. So it may be, and with all that, we are discussing.
Okay, can I just say though quickly? Can you just quickly address how is this legal? I realize that Donald Trump owns the DOJ now, but how is any of this legal, Ben? Please.
Well, so how is any of what legal?
Elon, like an unelected, unaccountable, like coming in with some 19-year-old bros and like taking over and shutting down whole agencies. Like, how is this legal?
So let's separate three issues. Issue number one is access to classified information, right? You're not allowed to break into USAID because they've got a lot of classified stuff, right? Number two, other statutes that might limit, your ability to access the Treasury Department's payment data, Privacy Act, HIPAA, the educational records privacy. There's all kinds of laws that forbid your access to government data. And then the third issue is that USAID exists in statute, right? It was created by Congress. It's not something that the president can simply rip apart himself, notwithstanding what Elon Musk tweets. So the first issue, as you know, Holly, the president controls what's classified. He's entitled to waive it at any time
with his mind.
with his mind. And if he says that
Oh, that's what the cactus did. He was the declassification authority.
Gotcha. And so, if the president says Elon Musk and his 19-year-olds have access to this material, then they do. And that takes care of that issue in all probability. It does not take care of statutory restrictions on, privacy issues. And if the information is not lawful to disclose, it is not lawful to disclose. And I would be shocked if there were not Privacy Act and other suits filed today over exactly that. The third issue is, it's an interesting question whether you can shut down the agency without without an act of Congress. You can certainly starve it and strangle it, right? And so that may be a distinction without too much of a difference. But, if you're announcing, as Elon Musk did, that you're shutting down an agency created by Congress, you are announcing that you're defying the law. And so there would be ultimately some serious impoundment and some other questions
But who's
there.
going to enforce that is the problem we have now.
Well, so I would think that it gets wrapped up in a lot of the personnel questions, right? If you start firing people because they're working for an agency you claim no longer exists, and they claim that it does exist, they're not doing this in the fashion that you would do it if the goal were to get the stuff done. They're doing it in the fashion, move fast and break things, and that leaves you legally vulnerable. The problem is that the legal remedies take, a year or something, and the depress and demoralize Holly Berkeley Fletcher takes 4 hours, right? And so, you and Elon are
4 minutes.
4 minutes. You're operating on a different time scale than Elon Musk. But none of that, I want to emphasize, not any of that except the first point, is what we're here to talk about today, because our guest is the estimable Stephanie Carvin, who is a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, which is the new home of Eve Gumon, and who is scandalously abandoning Quebec for Ottawa. No?
Oh, no, becoming a representative of Quebec in Ottawa, which is needed as the capital city. You need representative every provinces. So it's not an abandonment. It's just participation in the lively political space of the province. Country.
So Eve, who is going to be the formal ambassador of the Bloc Québécois in Ottawa,
Sure.
She's gonna open.
Sure.
And we're talking trade wars and tariffs today. And Stephanie, it's been a long time since I've seen you. I don't think I've seen you since we were in Israel together.
Yeah.
And that was
2019.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
It was a while ago. Trump was still in office. First one.
Right. We only get together when Trump's in office.
It's the reason we get together is to talk about the Trump presidency.
All right. So I saw last night that Canadians were booing the Star-Spangled Banner at a hockey game, that the Premier of British Columbia had ordered Red State spirits removed from liquor stores, and that there was one other thing, I forget what, and my feelings were hurt. I thought, and that Chrystia Freeland had, this one bothered me because I interviewed Chrystia Freeland for a job once, and I thought she She just said on Morning Joe that she was angry at me. And so I come away from this with my feelings hurt, uh and I'm wondering if you're ready to apologize on behalf of Canada.
Canadians love apologizing. It's like a national sport around here. I mean, we got hockey, lacrosse, and
And
apologizing.
apologies.
That's how we roll. But and I'd be interested in hearing from Ev on this as well, but because like maybe from the Quebec in her role as official Quebec representative to the rest of us, I would be interested in her perspective. But it does honestly feel like something broke here this weekend. Like I honestly feel something broke. And just John, I saw some John in the comments had a question about premiers ordering alcohol. Yeah, I mean, one of the major differences here in Canada than the United States is like provinces have a lot more control over alcohol. I don't know what it is in British Columbia, but by and large, the vast majority of alcohol in my province of Ontario is sold at provincially owned stores, right? They control pretty much for until like the last year or so, you could only buy alcohol at a provincially owned store. And yeah, so and to add to your thing, it's not just BC that's removing liquor. It's now also Quebec and Ontario.
And
So
are they
and
removing all liquor or just red state liquor?
red state liquor in British Columbia, all liquor in Ontario, and I think all liquor now in Quebec as well. So it's and we can talk about the sanctions strategy, but I think
No,
that
that's
the
smart.
the counter tariff strategy we have.
Honestly, the red state liquor in British Columbia, it's the wrong strategy because it aligns Canada with a political party. It aligns BC with a political party in the United States rather than Canada taking the position or BC taking the position. Um, hey, the United States is doing this. We have to respond to the United States.
But if you look at the tariff strategy right now, it is very, without saying, the quiet part out, I'll say the quiet part out loud, which is it's very red state targeted, right? BC was just open about it, but if you look at it right now, it's orange juice, it's absolutely bourbon, it's things like they are absolutely targeting the red states first. As a part, because in large part these were the tariffs that were put on in Trump 1. Trump 1 did, I think, were the 272 sanctions, I think, against steel in the first Trump administration. And they accused Canada of dumping. So there was like steel and aluminum, those tariffs. So those went away in about a year. And our retaliation was immediately to go after those things, right? We went after the bourbon, we went after the orange juice, we went after very specific red state stuff. Canada's approach to doing counter tariffs, this is maybe going a little bit further than I want. I want to be clear, I'm not a tariff expert, but my understanding is there's going to be two approaches which will ultimately hit $155 billion worth of U.S. goods, at least just from our side. The first is going to be an initial $30 billion worth of goods that are very, very targeted and are only going to target items where there's an immediate replacement for it. So it's like if there's like a kind of tire, for example, that, it's needed in airplanes or whatever, and you can't, there's no substitute for it, then that won't be targeted in the first round. But if there's, orange juice, we can get from other countries. Bourbon, alcohol, we can get from other countries. So those are fair game in the first round.
Yeah, it's all scotch in Canada now.
It's cold up here. We need to drink. Okay? So it is so cold up here right now. So it's sorry. We've been through a lot. Ev, I don't know if you have views on all this.
Not really, but I don't know how the Liberal Party portrayed it in English Canada. In Quebec, they're really like straightforward about targeting red states. They're open, like there's no quiet part. Like they went on the biggest show, which is called like Tout le monde en parle. Everyone's talk about this topic, and they were very clear. We're targeting Pennsylvania with motorbikes, orange juice, Florida with orange juice. They were like open about it and saying that the reason why they were doing this is that they are going to Washington this week and they want to talk to like senators and congressmen in DC that are in red state and like, look what we're doing, like put some pressure on Trump.
And is there coordination between Canada and Mexico I mean, you guys have very different um, uh, products that I mean, you guys, weirdly, Canada, the advanced economy, the more advanced economy, sells us mostly raw materials. Um, and Mexico, the less advanced economy, is a manufacturing powerhouse.
And avocados. That's what I'm concerned about.
There is the avocado issue, although we grow them in California, and so you know. Um, uh, do you know if Mexico and Canada are coordinating on this?
We do know that Trudeau and Sheinbaum have been discussing, and they have discussed. There's strangely, Canada does not have a lot of reach in Latin America and in Central America, and other than NAFTA, of course. So the extent to which we're coordinating, I'm not entirely sure of. But as you say, it's so different. Our economy. I mean, the U.S. really is the kind of that linchpin. We get a lot of our produce from Mexico as well. It's very often that you see it. So not as much. I think and actually, if anything, it got off to a bad start because one of the premiers, Premier Doug Ford of Ontario, who's been kind of taken on. There's like a whole backstory to this that I don't want to bore your audience with, like leadership races, Justin Trudeau resigning, replacing him, blah blah blah.
Oh,
Leadership
we've talked
vacuum.
about all that stuff
We
as
can't.
we
I don't
go.
know. I don't want to like put.
No, no,
like,
no. We have so many Canadian co-hosts, meaning two,
So,
that
but
we end up talking about Canadian politics quite a bit. So people are basically familiar with the fratricidal liberal premier fight going on, which involves things like people criticizing each other, and that counts as bare knuckle politics in Canada.
yeah, it is. I think it's true to a certain extent. But so anyway, so Doug Ford has kind of taken on this Captain Canada role. He has a blue hat that says Canada's not for sale because Trump keeps saying he's going to either annex or buy us. And he said that we should just kick Mexico out of NAFTA and just do a US-Canada deal. And that did not go well in Mexico. So I would say, if anything, we've probably been doing a very bad job of working with Mexico on this, which is really unfortunate because, if anything, we should be doing a lot more. But I don't have great visibility on what our tactics are there. So and also Mexico's just kind of, it's a new president there, Sheinbaum. Like, I'm not sure how well we're doing. I think that's an area we could probably improve on. But this has been, without getting too far ahead, maybe, I think one of the big issues we have is gravity theory, what economists would call gravity theory, that, we've put all of our eggs in one basket, and eggs are really expensive right now and rare. So this is a problem. And it's that the United States has turned on us, right, in a way that we had never really thought it would. And we do not really have many other economic partners to turn to, including Mexico, despite NAFTA, despite, in the EU, despite us having a free trade agreement with the EU as well. So this is, I feel like we're kind of really, really vulnerable. And to a certain extent, the Trump administration is being very successful in taking advantage of that.
Is it being successful? I mean, it's completely unclear to me what its demands are. It has slapped this tariff system on Canada because of Canada's large role in the fentanyl trade, which does not exist.
Yeah.
And in the background, pardon me for comparing you guys to a fire hydrant, there's a bit of a dog and a fire hydrant situation going on here. But it's, when you say successful, it implies that there's a strategic purpose that that they're accomplishing. What do you take to be Trump's objectives here that are successful, other than pissing off 40 million Canadians who it actually takes work to piss off?
Yeah, I think, okay, so there's a lot of context here. First of all, the legislation that Trump has used in order to enact these these tariffs and I want to be very clear, I'm not an expert in U.S. tariff legislation, is I believe the International Emergencies Act.
Correct.
And so
IEEPA.
he effectively has to construct an emergency at the Canadian border, right, in order to do this. And they're saying fentanyl. And yeah, I mean, the point that we keep trying to make very politely, and maybe we now need to shout more, and one of the reasons I want to talk to Americans as much as possible is that, yeah, it's less than 1% of fentanyl.
Well, you're talking to 27 of them right now.
Thank you, Americans. Thank you, 27 Americans.
But
JBX,
some of them
I
are
apologize
Finns,
that we burned
actually.
down the White House. Technically, we were still Britain then. We can work through those issues. Anyway, so the fact is that you have this issue with this constructed emergency, and less than 1% of fentanyl entering into the United States come from Canada. Less than 1% of what we'll call illegal migrants. Not crazy about that term, but illegal migrants for the purpose of this conversation. It come from Canada. Now, the thing that Americans will point to is that, yes, it's 1%, but that it's growing, right? It is growing, and it's growing at an exponential rate. And one of the things we have seen in Canada, for example, is that we have brought over many, many students from overseas, and then they disappear, right? Because chances are they're entering into the United States from wherever they came from, and then are staying in the United States. That's entirely possible. And this is fair. Like, these are legit criticisms, but do they constitute an emergency under the intention of the legislation as it was passed? So I think the answer is no. And I've seen a lot of writing, particularly in the last 2 days in Canada, that Canada could probably challenge this in American courts, because the fact is that, the tariffs have nothing to do with the actual alleged emergency, right? They are entirely disproportionate and are probably counterproductive. And so we could probably take that to the U.S. court. Now, you guys just had a conversation with Holly.
Not
Hi, Holly.
successfully, you couldn't. But
yeah, I mean,
you could try.
Yeah, we could try. And chances are I think there's a sense that we would be successful, but the U.S. would just ignore it, right? Like, we can't enforce it. This is the thing that you were getting to with Holly at the beginning of the podcast, like, or TV show, or hello everybody. So I think one of the things
whatever it is, this is
whatever
it's a revolution in morning television. That's what it is.
Right. Okay, I like that for us. So it's what I would say is that this is so there's we think it's not that, but also if you just look at Trump's statements, it's very clear that he just wants to. I think a couple of things philosophically. One is that he's very happy. He wants to crush us economically. He said as much. He tweets about it, or he posts about it on Truth Social. And I think that's understanding. So it's like, there's nothing we could do to appease him, I think, on a certain level. And the second thing is, he actually just likes tariffs. Like, he just thinks this is a good idea. He keeps talking about, earlier in the U.S., the golden age, I guess, where, the U.S. had high tariffs, and the U.S. there was tremendous growth and no income tax. And as he feels like this is a better system that the U.S. should go with. So I don't think this has anything to do with us. I think that the U.S. does have legitimate grievances around Canada's defense spending, which is abysmal. I think he has legit criticisms that we're not doing enough at the border. Yes, we probably should do more. These are all very fixable things, but ironically, the tariffs that he's putting in place will make it harder for Canada to remedy these things. It's going to be harder for us to do defense spending if our dollar is 25 cents American. It's going to be harder for us to do border security under these circumstances, right? So I think that this is one of the ironies of the situation, is that the tariffs are objectively making everything worse.
Well, my fear is that this is kind of what happened last time, in that he makes a big show, and then Canadian Mexico leaders go to the table and maybe give him a little something, like they negotiate a deal of some kind, even if it's not really a deal. And then he comes out and trumpets like this huge win, which is probably minimal. And that's kind of, it's all a sort of a PR thing. And so my concern is that, because I know this is costly for Canada, is that Canada will actually negotiate something that he can use to win. And then it'll look like he sort of beat Canada down. And obviously I'm not Canadian, and although I think there'll be economic cost on both.
Well, I might be American soon, the way things are going. So,
well, yeah, that's true. Anyway, I think there's costs on both sides, but I understand the concern for one's citizenry, but I would rather Canada just like tell him to F off.
This is so I think to a certain extent that this is the hope, I think, of the business community in Canada and the United States, that Trump is just looking for a win. And there's a lot of discussion here, especially in Alberta. Alberta is like the Texas of Canada, right? And bless them,
But
we love them.
colder.
I actually love Calgary. They have like some amazing pierogies out there. Just it's a wonderful province. They have some leadership stuff going on. We're not going to worry about that right now. But their approach is that, we have to give Trump a win in order to survive this. Incidentally, and this is a little off topic, my idea is that Canada should just agree to buy $1 billion of Trump coin a year and just say we will continue to buy $1 billion worth of Trump coin. I'm half joking. Like, this is now kind of a corrupt regime. Like, we're just gonna have to play. I think we need to play the Saudi Arabia card, right? We need to play the Saudi Arabia card. We need to be taking notes from Saudi Arabia and just start throwing money at the Trump organization, and maybe that'll take care of it. But I think that's joking, but grain of truth in there. But I think to a certain extent that with these tariffs is that, like I said, this is ideological. There's no win unless something insane happens in the markets today. And I think I saw some people posting in the chat that maybe that's starting. All these different kinds of things. Then maybe he'll change his mind. But I don't think he hasn't outlined a win that we can give him. We've already said we're going to spend billions of dollars of spending on the border and on defense and things like this. None of that's working.
So you've already said that. So I
yeah.
thought okay.
So we've already announced like a border package. I don't know to the extent that I think we even made a video. We sent him a video because it had like a bunch of stuff in it. Yeah, you can probably just Google the video. But it's to answer your question, he hasn't identified a win that we can give him yet. I don't know if this is art of the deal or he just doesn't care.
So I want to ask a different question, which is
sorry.
Canadians are almost as famous for their capacity for passive aggression as Minnesotans.
That's occupied Canada.
Yeah, right. But, there's some similar Minnesotans and Canadians have some similar rope-a-dope capacity. And so what would be the passive aggressive approach to this? Is there one, or is this just too dire an economic thing for that to work?
I think that this was kind of the debate leading up to this, because again, Canadians did see this coming. Like, I know it's been a bit of you guys have had so much news in the last week. I understand that you haven't been able to pay attention. So, I mean, I'm going to speak to the English media. I'm speaking too much for Canada. Like, this is what English Canadians do. We speak over French Canadians, and then they get upset. So I'd be curious as to what the conversation in Quebec is right now as to all this going on. I think that again, I think. I do think something in Canada had broke this weekend. I really do. It's just like the kinds of things I'm seeing on social media. Buy Canadian. I'm canceling my trip to the US. I'm never, I think there's a sense that there's nothing we can do. And the US has become an unreliable ally. That the US, we can sign an agreement with Trump, but next month he can tear it up again. And probably will. If he just has a bad day, he can just do this. That any agreement we sign with the United States is at best only good for 4 years. And I think that's gonna affect the relationship from now on. Like, this is going to be a new characteristic of the relationship between Canada and the United States. So can you be passive aggressive with that? I don't know. I mean, like, the passive aggressive things, it's like, they're talking about taking down US flags at like border cities. That's like the pettiest thing you could possibly do. Booing at hockey games. That's not passive aggressive. That's aggressive. But
there is no such thing as passive aggression at a hockey game.
That's fair. That is fair. What I would say is that there was some debate as to whether or not we should come out with tariffs really, really hard from the get-go or not. Whether we should like ramp up and not. I mean, it's interesting. That's China's strategy right now. China has not indicated it says it's going to handle this through the WTO. Good luck, China, with that. But we're seeing this idea now that like, okay, we're gonna have to do business differently. We don't really know what that looks like. That's going to be a subsequent conversation. What I would say is that we have not gone the passive aggressive approach. That $155 billion is the aggressive approach, but we're only starting with the 30 billion in the first round, because what's happening now in Canada is that they're going to start a second round of these tariffs very soon. But what they're trying to do is consult with business first, because everyone knows like tariffs are bad. Like we all watched Ferris Bueller, right? Like the conversation in Ferris Bueller, it's not good. So the thing is, what the government wants to do is consult with business before it applies the second round of tariffs, just to make sure that we're not going to do anything that is going to irreparably harm our own economy. At the end of the day, my take on this, before I maybe ask Ev her opinion from Quebec, but I do my best to keep up with the French media. And I would say I'm seeing similar headlines, right? I am seeing similar headlines here, which is interesting that we're seeing this kind of moment of national unity in a country that doesn't really do unity that well. But we're kind of going to this point where I think, I just like the kind of foundations of this are gone, and of trust are gone. Ultimately, Canada will lose a trade war with the United States. I think we understand that. So the question is, how much, to use the language of deterrence, how much pain can we inflict back on the U.S. before we actually get into
and how targeted the pain.
Can Canada sort of join up closer with Europe? Maybe Australia, New Zealand do a NATO retaliation against the United States, which sounds so bizarre.
It would be interesting if that happened. I mean, I think this gets back to the gravity theory, where countries tend to trade with countries that are like them and are close to them and things like this. Germany doesn't want to buy car parts from Ontario, right? Like they just don't. They want to buy they want to, like the United States, they want to buy our minerals, our resources, our gas, our oil. And that might be something that'll happen in the future, but there's not really an immediate way to replace the United States. One of the things I was thinking of over the weekend is how Australia does it. Australia seems to have been able to keep its good relations with the United States while still having a free trade agreement with China. And maybe we need to start thinking like Australians. Like, how do we go from here? I'm not an economist. I'm just someone who's like, let's start thinking outside the box. Let's start looking elsewhere. So Ev, I don't know, what is the conversation in Quebec? Because I would like to hear it from me. I can read the editorials, but I mean, I didn't see Tout le monde en parle last night.
It's pretty much the same conversation. Though one thing I noticed, and it goes back to Ollie's point about the AU, we've always been closer. Like, we've always kind of tend to adopt laws that are quite similar. And I've always been really attracted to what the AU does. And now we're seeing to have people talk like, oh, well, Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon is quite close. Maybe we could join the AU. It's clearly some jokes, but these are jokes that are starting to emerge that we've never really seen before. And seeing how much jokes can become reality in a matter of seconds. Maybe the Overton window will shift, and we will be talking about AU partnership more now. Though I think it would be more interesting. Like, we're leading the G7 this year. Maybe this is the place where we should work more, I think. So basically that's the conversation is pretty much the same as in the rest of Canada, for the moment, at least.
In the long run.
Can I just say, and I figured out how we can do it. Canada, after Russia invaded Ukraine illegally back in 2022, Canada and Denmark solved the longstanding border dispute that we had over an island, Hans Island. I don't know if you know Hans Island. Small, maybe happy anecdote for an otherwise kind of gloomy Monday morning. But Hans Island was this island. It's like remote. It's like this little tiny dot. It's off the coast of Greenland. And we'd been fighting over it for a number of years. And the thing is, like, it's such an inhabitable place to be. If you put your flag up there, it blows away in like 30 minutes. Like the winds are so strong, right? So Canada would go, they'd put up their flag, it would blow off, then Denmark would come and put their flag. So the way you would control the territory is that Canada would go and put Canadian whiskey by the flagpole. And then the Danes would come, they would take the whiskey, and then they would put schnapps on the flagpole. And then this repeated itself for years. This was really how we did our this is a Canadian territorial battle for you. So what ended up happening was we in 2022 solved this border dispute. We split the island in half. And in the treaty where we solved this problem, it says this is not a border for the purposes of the EU, because if it is a border, then we could request to join. So I say we gang up with Denmark. We say, okay, this is now a border for the purpose. We remove that line from that treaty, and suddenly we could apply to be in the EU. We have a border with Europe.
All right, I just want to say,
it.
since you brought up Hans Island, there is exactly one person who has ever circumnavigated Ellesmere Island by kayak, and it is my uncle.
You're kidding.
Yeah?
Was he claiming it?
No, I mean, he, just paddled around it, but mostly had to drag the kayak because, the ice it's not navigable. Maybe John Turk is actually the person who has sovereignty over Hans Island.
He might, this day and age, he
paddled
might as
by
well
it one day.
Might as well go for it.
All right. Excuse me.
So you're choking. So I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think Canadians would like it, to go into this. I think Canadians, like, by and large, would love to join the EU. It just economically it didn't make sense. I just and there would be like horrible transition costs, but I just don't know how you continue on a relationship with the United States if again there's fundamental questions about the rule of law, right? I mean, like, all of our agreements with the United States are based on the idea that there's rule of law. All of our agreements are kind of like, okay, we're going to get into NAFTA, and this is going to be a long-standing permanent agreement, and this is no longer the case. So I think this is the thing that is worrisome, is that if you have a political party, I mean, I don't know if Trumpism survives Trump. This is the reality. I just don't know if this is who the Republican Party is now. I don't know.
Well, what we're hoping for is a Ford-like mellowing, right? Where, Rob Ford is a completely lawless individual, and Doug Ford is a mildly eccentric, sort of crazy person, and but more or less manageable. And that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping to follow your example from deranged crack smoking to
that was Rob Ford. Rob Ford was the deranged.
Yeah. We're hoping.
Yeah. And from
Rob Ford to Doug Ford. Is the hopeful trajectory of Trumpism. Maybe he will, drop dead, or will live through the next 4 years, limp through the next 4 years, and like Doug Ford, he will be succeeded by so not his brother, because there is no brother, but somebody who is the sort of mellower version
like
of
Elon.
No, that wouldn't be mellower. That would be more manic
But I think
and ketamine addicted.
Successor Shadow. I think Shadow President might be here to stay. I don't know.
So, Ev, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I think we've pretty much covered it up. I was actually going to pivot on the security arena and maybe ask what are the consequences of all of this, and like this rule of law, like death from like relationship between Canada and the US in the national security arena.
Well, I don't think we know, right? I mean, the problem with everything that Stephanie just said, as Stephanie will not disagree with me, I don't think, is that I don't think there's a viable path for Canadian independence if the United States is not a rule of law country. That this is not a, we're going to gobble you up threat. It's a, it's a like the entire structure of Canadian government is based on the idea that you don't have to defend the border, right? Canada is a completely different country if it has an antagonistic relationship with the United States, down to the fact that something like 90+% of the population lives within a very close distance of the border. And so like I don't I don't really understand, you know, Canada cannot have the relationship with the United States that Switzerland had with, various hostile, non-democratic powers that surrounded it at different times, than just says, every male in this country has a machine gun, we're in a mountain, go for it, take your best shot, right? Like, and, at the end of the day, Switzerland is the only German speaking part of the world that Hitler did not try to invade, right? Look at the topography of Switzerland. It also look at the amount of border space that it has relative to the height of its mountains. Canada's just not in this position. And so I don't I totally see, Stephanie, what you're saying about um a kind of less reliance on the US relationship. But if you hypothesize a true and complete breakdown of the US as a rule of law society, I don't think it works.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about that. If you want to take a first shot at answering, because I've answered everything so far.
Well, you're
Well,
the guest. I'm here
I'm
mostly
being
to ask
Canadian
questions.
polite.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. That's appreciated.
And sensitive to Anglo-Franco relations, which is really important as well. No, okay, so I would say that yeah, I mean the whole premise of NAFTA is exactly that, right? Like rule of law, like that, we can sell to the US and have a lot of confidence. And yes, it's two different systems, et cetera, still a pain in the butt. But yeah, I mean, if there's complete breakdown of that in the United States, we are in a heap of trouble, right? A heap of trouble. I know I have friends who assisted the January 6th Commission who are now coming to the realization they will not be able to travel to the United States for at least 4 years. They are worried. These are people who gave active assistance.
These are RCMP people,
at the request of a congressional investigation, thinking that this would be fine, and now realizing that no, this is no longer the case. So, from that perspective, it's hard. And to maybe get to Ev's question about security and some of the other things that are going on, and to maybe bring some of Holly's kind of concerns into this as well. We are so heavily dependent on the US for our national security. It is hard to underestimate. The US is the primary source of our lead generation when it comes to national security. And so many of our terrorism cases have been thwarted because of a US tip-off. We are really heavily intertwined, not at the high levels. It's like I did interviews. If I can promo my book, one of the books here.
Yeah.
Okay. The least interesting name of a book of all time, like books that instantly
that's not
create
the
insomnia.
way to sell the book.
It's Intelligence, Analysis, and Policy Making: The Canadian Experience. Which is still we could not think of a good title at all. We gave up. This is the book you read and instantly fall asleep. But when we did interviews, we went to the US and we talked to a number of officials, National Security Council and stuff. And Canada never comes up at that level, right? We just don't, because but the reason for that is that the relationship is so automatic. It's so obvious. And we talk a lot about working level. And I think the hope was, and having spoken to national security officials here in Canada in the lead up to the Trump's inauguration, I think there was a sense that this working level relationship would continue. It worked really well. It continued to work really well under Trump 1, right? Worked really, really well under Trump 1. No, apparently there were some very difficult conversations where, the US has threatened to cut us off. That happened under Trump 1. I could very much see that happening a lot more under Trump 2. And the thing is, if half the FBI gets fired because they participated in some way in those January 6th investigations, that is going to have a devastating impact on Canadian national security because just of the sheer amount of cooperation between the two sides. One of the things I've always worried about is that if the American intelligence community is fighting its own battles, and we know Ben and Holly, you know better than anyone, the U.S. intelligence community is a fierce bureaucratic fighter. If they're fighting their own internal battles, they're not focusing on the mission. Right. And that mission helps protect Canada as well. And we can have a whole conversation about whether it should be like this or not. I'm not necessarily endorsing it. This is just the state of facts as they are.
No, it is the reality.
It is the reality we live in. And so what I worry about is that, again, if there's this decline in the U.S. as a rule of law country, that in the way that we've kind of seen in the last 2 weeks, then this really does put us in a bad situation. John Hawkinson, I want to give you a shout out for putting the link to the book in the comments.
Our Greek chorus is the best audience in the world.
Best audience in the world. I love you so much.
I will just say a word about the Greek chorus because it has today breached a milestone that we have never breached before. We currently have 31 people live on the show. We've never crossed 30 before. We get a lot of views on YouTube, the podcast version, but this is a milestone. We've crossed 30, and that is a reminder to all of you who watch this on YouTube that you can come into the light, be part of the Greek chorus, see John Hawkinson sharing the relevant thing. We've got it's an incredible group of people who show up here every day, shoot the shit over morning coffee, and talk with us. You should become one, which you can do by becoming a paid subscriber of Dogshirt Daily.
Someone in the chat points out that it's a large crowd because nobody slept last night, and I can confirm that. Maybe that's the secret to the revolution, is that nobody sleeps anymore, and so everybody's already awake. And so 8 o'clock, maybe we should move it earlier, Ben. Maybe we should move it to 3 a.m.
I was awake at 3 a.m. Look, the old slogan of In Lieu of Fun is we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have, and then the guest's name. But today we're changing it to we're not allowed to sleep anymore, but we are allowed to have a revolution in morning television. Anyway, I want to ask Stephanie about the model. So, first of all, I want to say a word in defense of the rule of law in the United States, which is, you do not judge a criminal justice system when you find a body and you're pretty sure it was a murder. I mean, the body has a knife in it, and you say, oh my God, there was a murder. It's not been solved. There's, the criminal justice apparatus has completely failed. And it seems to me when an administration comes in and attempts a sort of shock and awe, some of which is perfectly lawful, like pardoning 1,500 felons or misdemeanor people. It's perfectly lawful. It is disgusting. It's corrupt, but it's not unlawful, right? Some of which is frankly unlawful, and some of which is of dubious legality, but maybe lawful or not, right? And you have all of it happen in this giant 2-week clusterfuck. And that seems to me like, okay, you found a body or 5 bodies and you think they're probably murders. But then you have to sort of let the system respond, right? You have to call the police. You have to let the police show up, do the forensic examination, do the investigation, see if you get an arrest, see if you get a prosecution and a conviction. And by the way, one of the victims wasn't a murder at all. It was a legitimate self-defense situation that just happened to be at the same location. Um, I do think, you know, judging the, like, what this is an attempt at a very serious set of reframings of or diminutions of the rule of law in the United States. But I don't think, like, you know, the OMB order has already been frozen, and the Justice Department responded over the weekend by providing guidance that's actually compliant with it, right? With the order freezing it. And it seems to me that the how you evaluate the rule of law in the United States will require some block of time to see how much of this stuff is done successfully and how much of it is stopped and by what means. That's just
so
cautious, qualified, defensive.
No, I think that's fair. And I mean, one of the things I did find really inspiring about your work with Lawfare and the Lawfare podcast and stuff like that was explaining, okay, these are the avenues, these are the things. And yeah, I mean, there are legal remedies. I'm hoping that we're going to see this week, finally, some kind of legal, like, people challenging stuff, people suing, people, you know, I don't know if Congress is going to do anything. This is the thing I don't understand. Like, why would Congress kind of cede all of its authorities?
That's a much longer term problem than Trump.
Yeah, exactly. Like Congress, and we have issues with that in Parliament here too. But that kind of has to do more with the parliamentary system than it does with, you know, the idea of the U.S. needs checks and balances, right, to actually run. We don't have that as our system. Getting really into nerdy stuff here now, but I mean, I think, and to be fair, I do accept that. I think the concern I have is that we didn't see, like, when Trump won, when he says, okay, Muslim ban, all of a sudden you see everyone just mobilize, go to the airports, immediate habeas corpus requests, right? All these different kinds of actions. And I just feel we haven't seen that kind of response. And I don't know if it's just everyone's so depressed and it's cold and it's winter and we're just not seeing that kind of resistance. I hate to use the word resistance in the US, but like this kind of activism, I think, that's needed to kind of stand up and defend these institutions. I'm just not sure that we're seeing it. So
I think there's a few reasons for that, and they're subtle. So first of all, there's nothing, you know, when you slap a travel ban on all people from certain countries, there are these immediate effects on very large numbers of people. So the universe of plaintiffs becomes very large instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
When there's reporting about, you know, it's, for example, the break, you know, Elon Musk gaining access to blah, blah, blah. I think you will see litigation today about that.
Can I just point out that one of some of these, you know, journalists, Wired's been fantastic. I'm so happy to, you know, shout out to Wired. They identified some of the people doing it. And one of them is a 19-year-old Canadian, Edward Corstein.
So it's all your guys' fault.
Yeah,
you see,
like,
this is
wow,
all self-inflicted.
Like 20-something bros, honestly. It's
he
like
goes by Big Balls on LinkedIn.
Not even 20-something.
Yeah, he's like 19 little. He's literally wearing a sports jacket and shorts in his photo, and I'm like, okay, wow, this is a lot. So yeah, I mean, I have
maybe
to.
My son can get a job with Doge. He's an accomplished gamer.
Like, I understand like all the challenges going on, but I mean, I would like to think that the U.S. justice system could stand up to a 19-year-old Canadian called Big Balls. Well, you know, I do think that the capacity of the U.S. system to withdraw
I don't know. I mean, his name is Big Balls. I think the justice system is intimidated.
His nickname?
Yeah, like he apparently had a LinkedIn profile called Big Balls. Yeah, so like I have to think that the U.S. justice system, despite all of the challenges, could probably
No,
handle that.
I
Yeah,
think that's right. I think the difference between this and 4 years ago is definitely a level of people being demoralized. There's also the diversity um, of the challenge. It's not so focused on, you know, airports, right? And then, but I also think a lot of invisibility to the resistance, and I use that word guardedly, or to the pushback that's happening. For example, if you look at the FBI, it's clear that there is enormous staff level resistance. You know, the FBI Agents Association is helping people refuse to respond to this. You know, Musk is trying to get people to resign by sending out these fork in the road letters, and people aren't resigning, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's not happening. Somebody, and I don't know who it was, I published it yesterday, sent out this guidance for compliance with the OMB order, and it is really broad in language. Now, Seth, I don't know who wrote that. It's somebody at the Justice Department. Um, it's, and so I think you gotta, like, somebody set off, it's not just a bomb, it's a series of bombs around the US government. And you have to see how the dust settles, and it may not settle similarly in all these different places in terms of how um, before you evaluate how the system performed. And I think it's going to take, I would say, 6 months to a year to assess that. But the perception of it will be um, uh, enormously shaped by the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks, since we're entering week 3, not by the resolution, right? If a bunch of it settles out in a rule of law fashion, um, nobody will mitigate their sense of the first 3 weeks by the way the resolution happened, and that's the point of a shock and awe
My
response.
my concern though is, like, again, so let's say there's a court. What if they start just ignoring court orders? How does that? And then obviously they are not going to prosecute lawbreakers that are on their side at the DOJ. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, where does law, like, really start to break down?
Okay, so let's take that as those are two very different questions. One, um, you know, the the OMB order guidance this weekend was not ignoring a court order. It was, like, in fact, if anything, it was interpreting a court order more broadly than it was written. And so, once you start ignoring court orders, you have real problems. Lawyers have to appear in front of those courts, right? People get held in contempt. I don't like that gets into the real warp and woof fabric of the rule of law. And I'm not saying they wouldn't try it. I'm saying I'm not going to do hypotheticals on that, because the exact situation matters a lot. So if somebody tries to, I would assume that somebody is going to raise the question of whether, when Elon Musk tweets that he's shutting down Lutheran charities, right, that's a frank violation of the court's order from Friday. I would be surprised if somebody does not raise that to the court in question. Um, and so, but all of these are these kind of um, integrated, iterative dialogue between this group of people and the judicial system that is ongoing and just starting, and we have to, I would say, I don't say we have to give it a chance because out of idealism. We have to give it a chance because that's the way the rule of law works, and we don't really have a choice. All right, we are going to break because we begin on time and we end on time, Stephanie. But
can I end with breaking news? Is that Ontario is now breaking its contract with Starlink.
Excellent.
So
this is
Canada. We will be the home of the American resistance. I think Margaret Atwood wrote a novel about this. But I think that was. I think this is where we have to fight, right? This is where Canada has to fight. And Canadians will be watching very closely the American courts and things like that because we know what an impact that's going to have on us as well. So good luck. Good.
Well, Canadians, the place to do that is at Lawfare.
Of course.
We have a lot of Canada has historically underperformed in lawfare readership relative to, say, Finland. But so we want to get that per capita Canadian lawfare readership up higher.
We're being beat by Finland?
Oh, Finland wildly overperforms in per capita lawfare readership.
I feel like this is like a hockey challenge. We'll get on that.
All right. But there's one other thing we have to do, Stephanie, before we leave, which is you have a new podcast.
Yes. For those who are interested in Canadian national security, all 31 of you, I'm sure. What I would suggest is we have a new podcast called Secure Line, which is looking at the Canadian. We try to be like mini lawfare, like all kind of in one like tiny little package. And what I would say is like our first episode is actually on how Canada can survive the Trump administration. If you are interested in that, please put it out there. Oh, yep. Thank you, John. John, I'm going to have to start paying as my research assistant. So thank you, John. But he's got the link in the chat. But yeah, our first episode is literally on Canada and the Trump administration, which I think he described as Canada being trapped in a closet with a bear and trying to put lipstick on it. That's kind of how we feel about our situation.
All right. We are going to leave it there. Hey, folks, we will be back tomorrow. So will Canada. So will Mexico. So will the rule of law in the United States. It's all going to be a little shakier than we'd like. It's all going to require a bit of fighting. But remember, the national slogan of the United States, at least we don't work for USAID. It could be worse.
It could be worse.
Keep the faith. We'll be back tomorrow. I don't know who the guests are going to be. I don't know who the hosts are going to be. But, that's what you signed up for. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Stephanie. Bye.
Cheers.